Hello and welcome to the second episode of Open to Question. My guest today is Anil Swarup, a former Union Coal Secretary who later became Union Education Secretary. An IAS officer of the 1981 batch, he belongs to the Uttar Pradesh cadre. He has worked closely with former Uttar Pradesh Chief Ministers Kalyan Singh and Mayawati and has served under both former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He helped set up the Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, for which he was widely applauded both here and abroad. He is also the author of Ethical Dilemmas of a Civil Servant and Not Just a Civil Servant. As a great believer in the promotion of best practices in government, he set up the Nexus of Good Foundation after he retired from service. With his varied and wide experience in government, both in the country's most populous state and at the center, he is eminently suited to discuss what is today a hot-button issue, the future of jobs in India. India is currently suffering from a serious unemployment problem. The Modi government's demonetization move in 2016 paralyzed the informal sector, industrial output fell, and jobs disappeared. The hasty implementation of the Goods and Services Tax in 2017 proved to be another blow that slowed the economy and impacted jobs. And then millions lost jobs after the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. India's unemployment rate crept up to nearly 8% in December 2021, according to the Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, an independent think tank. It was more than 7% in 2020 and for most of 2021. According to Kaushik Basu, former World Bank chief economist, who was also a former chief economist to the government of India, and I quote him, "This is way higher than anything seen in India, at least over the last 3 decades, including the big economic crisis of 1991, when the country did not have enough dollars to pay for imports." So what is happening, Anil Swarup?
I'm also myself surprised. COVID has become an excuse, an additional cause for unemployment. But I think the problem happened before the arrival of COVID. If you look at the numbers as you pointed them out, the GDP itself was not growing at the rate at it should have grown. And as per the Okun's law, or even otherwise, if GDP doesn't grow, employment gets impacted. And that's what has happened in India. Now, you have listed out a couple of very prominent reasons for this lack of growth in India. One, of course, being demonetization. The other being the hasty implementation of GST. As far as the second part is concerned, GST, I think world over, whenever GST is implemented, there are problems to begin with. They were teething troubles, and I think they are getting over it. So I don't think GST is a problem as on date, and in the coming years, it will ease out. But that's not going to solve our unemployment problem. GST may have caused a bit of unemployment in between, but problems relating to unemployment, the foundation thereof, if I can use that term foundation, was demonetization. Because let us look at the sectors where employment happens, whether it is happening there. Because sometimes in our quest for understanding at a macro level, we don't go into the details of why of the problem. And that's why we can't find solutions to the problem. In my understanding, apart from agriculture, of course, that is a great employer. The biggest employer in this country is the infrastructure sector, the construction sector, if I may be more specific about. And that sector has suffered phenomenally. It is recovering a bit, but a bit doesn't matter. It has to recover big time for employment to increase. The second sector, which is probably, to my mind, totally ignored, is the small scale sector. We are also become so fond of big things, flashy things that can hit headlines, that we are only bothered about large industries. And if you look at the data, I'm not an economist, but whatever I've heard and read about it is that larger industries don't really create a lot of employment. It is the small scale sector, the medium scale sector that creates employment. And we aren't even talking about it. It's not even in the discourse. We are not even discussing it. And since I handled industry at some point in time in my career, and I'm in touch with a large number of small scale industries, they are in serious trouble. Of course, the double whammy of demonetization and GST hit them quite badly. But apart from that, there are many other issues relating to unemployment or the small scale sector that is impacting that sector. To my mind, these are two very prominent sectors whereas the government does emphasize both the building and the construction sector as well as small scale sector, where employment can actually pick up. One point probably which you may have considered but not mentioned here, one of the indicators of growing unemployment is also the pressure on MNREGA workers. There the pressure has increased quite phenomenally. And finally, if you look at the labor force in India, since I was at some point in time Director General Labor Welfare also, and I don't think numbers would have changed much. Almost 90 to 92% of labor force is in the unorganized sector. And we
Absolutely.
seem to be focused only on the organized sector. And when I talk in terms of large scale industry, that's the organized sector. We, keep cooking up numbers to say more people have joined the Provident Fund and things like that. Doesn't really matter. To my mind, the fundamental issue is acceptance of existence of a problem. If we push the problem under the carpet that all is well, sab sanga si, so it won't work. Let's just try and understand, first accept the existence of a problem of unemployment, then go into the why of it, and then work out an action plan to overcome it. It has to be a very comprehensive plan, taking into account the steps that need to be taken to revive the building and the construction sector as well as the small scale sector.
I was actually going to come to this unorganized sector, which, as you said, is 85% of the workforce in the country. What I'd like to know from you, since you've been in government for well over 3 decades, is that why have successive governments paid so little attention to this section, this 85%, apart from schemes like the Narega scheme that you just mentioned, and similar such schemes in the past?
No,
Why?
let us understand the necessity of Narega. It's an employment guarantee scheme. It is not employment generating scheme. Let's try and understand the difference.
Yeah.
That is, if a person doesn't get employed elsewhere, then he has a guarantee of certain minimum things. That's what MNREGA is.
Yeah.
So I don't think MNREGA number should be used for saying that people have got employed, because they've not got employed, so to say. It's merely a guarantee till the time they get an employment. Now, coming to the fundamental issue that you asked, the informal sector. Informal sector does not necessarily mean that these guys are unemployed. They are all employed. They are defined as in the informal sector because the necessary social security cover that is mandated under various laws becomes applicable to that 7, 8, 9% of the organized sector. The rest of them don't get covered. Doesn't mean they're unemployed. Large number of either self-employed or elsewhere where they don't get covered. I mean, if the stipulations I remember are correct, if there are more than 10 people employed in a particular entity, then only they go in for Provident Fund. If they're less than 10, it's not that they're unemployed. They're not mandated to join the Employment Provident Fund. So let's keep that definition apart, because that definition is based on Social Security. If we can focus on the employment part, I mean, obviously, every worker should be given Social Security. But the question here is, Social Security comes after he gets employment, So whether that employment is happening or not, that is the key factor here.
During the pandemic that we just mentioned also, even salaried jobs shrank, according to the CMIE. And studies by the Azim Premji University show that young workers, 15 to 23 years old, were the hardest hit during the 2020 lockdown. Why were they the hardest hit?
Because, COVID hit demand. When demand gets hit, manufacturing gets hit. Manufacturing gets hit, employment gets hit. So I'm not too concerned about what happened during COVID, because that is something that happened beyond our control. And we couldn't do much about it. The question is, now that COVID is stabilized, so to say, it's not that rampant, what are we doing now? That's the key question. And what happened before COVID arrived? I'm not sure we should be discussing too much about COVID, because no one could have factored for what happened in COVID. I mean, you can always criticize this didn't happen, that didn't happen, but I don't think it will help us. What will really help us, what went wrong before 2020, before COVID arrived, because COVID has been used an excuse for lower GDP growth rate and lower employment rate. Let's put that aside. Okay, let's accept the fact that because of COVID, GDP did not go up the manner it should have. It shouldn't have. It won't have. So did unemployment. The key question is, what happened before 2020 and what is going to happen now? So let's not spend time on COVID, because COVID was a bad time world over employment impacted, world over GDP impacted. So be it, but that's done and dusted. How are we preparing ourselves for the future? Since, if I understood you correctly, the
Yeah.
topic was what next?
Yeah. Okay, to understand all this, can we just go back a little in time? So, when India liberalized her economy in the early 1990s, there was an expectation that the private sector would create the jobs that were needed. Why has this not happened? I mean, we are 3 decades on, and
No, it is incorrect to say that the private sector jobs were not created. They were indeed created.
huh,
Probably as
not,
many were not created as were anticipated.
yeah.
If you look at the employment rate before 91 and after that, I think there is a considerable amount of improvement in absolute terms. Perhaps in percentage terms, since the entire volume of population grew, probably the entire population could not be absorbed. I mean, that is a given. But to say that liberalization did not impact employment would be
Mm.
wrong. I think
No,
it
I'm
did
not
impact
saying it,
employment.
but
Okay.
that it
Now
did not.
let us understand why did the employment did not grow at the rate at it was thought to have grown. It should have grown. One, I think all the investment that came in was not as much employment generating as you would link capital formation to employment. Normally, if you say for every rupee that is invested, so much employment should be generated, it will happen only if you have labor intensive units coming in. If you have large industries coming in, as I keep saying, I'm not against large industry, but large industry and employment do not have a direct relationship, so to say. Small and medium industry, that focus that should have been there for small and medium industry, every government has been responsible for that. That is one. Number two, which has been recognized with the current government, but not much seems to have been done, is the fact that the nature of skilled labor that was required to be absorbed in the industry and service sector, that skilling did not happen. So you have a lot of people doing BAs and MAs, and they're good for nothing. They're not employable. Whoever is skilled or not skilled, they're not employable. So you have a labor force that is not employable. And that is again, unfortunately, gets recognized in the national education policy announced in 2020. That policy clearly brings this aspect out, that we are educating children who are becoming students, but they are unemployable because they're not skilled, and for a variety of reasons that have been mentioned in the report. So what really needs to be done is, and I had told Dr. Kasturi Rangan when he came to meet me, I was then education secretary, and he was formulating the policy. I said, with the policy, you should have a clear-cut action plan outlining what needs to be done, how it will be done, who will do it, by when it will be done. Unfortunately, the national education policy, which took 7 years to formulate that document, it's a brilliant document, does not have a detailed action plan. It does have an action plan, but it's not detailed. So what has happened is, they've said this needs to be done in case of skilling, and skilling is very important in the context of employment. You talk to industry, which I do, they want certain set of skilled personnel that are not available. And there are so many people who are available to be employed, but they are not skilled appropriately. So, as I said, skilling is the key. So, one is the focus on small and medium scale sector, the other is skilling. And then, of course, if you recall in my opening statement, I had suggested there also skilled labor would be required, is the construction, building in the construction sector. That employs the maximum. If I remember the numbers correctly, almost 13% of the labor force, which is the highest, is in the building and the construction sector. That sector has collapsed. Now, it's not only because of COVID. COVID, of course, added to the misery, but it started collapsing before that. Now, there's a perverse sort of a logic here. This building the construction sector got oiled by the money that was not accounted for. Now, I'm not saying that money should become available for oiling this building the construction worker sector, because what demonetization did was, and rightly so, it sucked out that, black money. Of course, it's gone back, I'm told, back into the market. But fact of the matter is, to begin with, it brought tremendous pressure on that. Now, I mean, let me expand this a bit, because we are now looking into future as to what clearly can be done in terms of generation of employment, building the construction worker into. I mean, I live in Noida. I don't know, where do you live? You will see so many unfinished buildings. No, it's a tragedy, because that's an investment that has been made. There is a cost to the delays that are happening, but they are standing there. Now we have this RERA, authorities that have been set up for settling disputes. If I were in the government, I would assign RERA to settle the disputes relating to each of the construction that is happening here. Let us try and understand whether the delay is to be done. We did it in coal, where everything had collapsed. We built it through a legislation. It can be done in the construction sector also, but it will have to be very detailed, and it will not hit the headlines tomorrow. The problem is that we are so fond of headlines tomorrow that we don't go into the details. So if we have to find solutions to the construction sector, then we have to sit with each of the project and find out the cause of that, and come up with a package so that that site is revived. Now, what will that do? Construction will start, demand will increase, manufacturing will increase, employment will increase. It will create a virtuous cycle. But we are allowing it to happen. Courts are deciding what needs to be done with this. Courts are not for the purpose of development. They are there to decide on an issue. No, for development purpose, a proactive action needs to be set up. Again, if I were in the government, I would suggest set up an empowered group that looks at each of these projects and then find out why are they held up, and pinpointedly say that these are the reasons. This can be managed, this can't be managed. I'm not saying all sectors, all projects will be revived, but I'm certain 20-30% projects can be revived, because in my understanding, many of them are not on account of the fault of the promoters. They're either COVID happened or something happened. So let's work out a formula. We do that in case of industry, don't we? We come up with a revival package of industry. We did that in case of coal. In power sector, it has been done. Why can't it be done in construction sector? I've touched upon only one sector. Similarly, you can look at the medium and small scale sector as
well. In India, only, I don't know, roughly about 15% of the jobs are in the organized sector, and only a fraction of that is in the government sector. And yet we see today, I was traveling in UP during the recent elections there. The biggest demand is for government jobs. Why? When they represent such a fraction of...
It's very simple. Government jobs give you job security, which private sector doesn't give. I'm digressing a bit to illustrate my point. I had paid 10,000 rupees to Big Bazaar for shopping in next 12 months. Okay. Now that Big Bazaar has shut up, I don't know where I'm going to get that money from. But of course, that's only 10,000. But when I visited one of those so-called decaying Big Bazaars, I spoke to some of the employees there, and they are shocked. They don't know what has happened to them. They haven't got their salaries for 3 months because of no fault of theirs, So that's why everyone wants a government job, for security. It has its flip side. There are problems in it, but that's why they want the government job. But since you touch upon this, let us understand, where does the employment come from? It comes from the private sector. It comes from the public sector. We've touched upon the private sector so far. Let's look at the public sector. What are the areas in which government creates employment? Unfortunately, a large number of jobs are vacant. At a time when there is so much unemployment, government is not selecting people. Now, recently, the Prime Minister announced a mission. Now, why should we have a mission when it should have been done on a routine case? Someone should be held responsible. And, let me tell you, it begins from the top. Since I was coal secretary, and after I left 2016, even at that point in time, I had to fight to get directors of various companies, coal companies. Why should anybody sit on files of directors who have to be appointed? Why should there be a delay in appointment of CMD? The day the CMD is appointed, when he's going to go. 3 years, 5 years, whatever is the tenure, why can't we do the selection before that? So it begins from the top. Similarly, as you come down, in each of the departments, there are huge vacancies that are in existence. Now, at a time, I'm not saying it's going to make a big dent in the unemployment problem, but at least whatever can happen should happen. Thousands of vacancies are there in government, both center and state. Why aren't they being filled? Why should there be a mission? Now look at army or military. For the past 2 years, there have been no recruitment. Now, government also creates job. I'm not saying that government should be an employment generating machine, but whatever employment that you can provide, you should do. It's not happening.
No,
Someone get down to it.
no, if
Why
I
should,
can
yeah.
interrupt you for a minute, because I'd like you to explain this. For instance, what you're saying is absolutely right. In February this year, I think the minister concerned on the floor of parliament said that there were 8 lakh vacancies in government. And now you have the prime minister announcing 10 lakh more jobs. So what is he referring to? Those 8 lakh plus 2, or
Yes,
at
yes,
sec-
yes.
so
My
he's actually
understanding is
only referring to creating
no,
2
it is
lakh.
not even. See, when he takes 10 lakhs, he would have accounted for those 8 lakhs and the likely vacancies in next 1.5 years. So I don't think there is an additional creation. That's my understanding. I may be totally wrong.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it is the vacancies in government jobs. That's the tragedy.
No. So the second question is that why are these vacancies not filled?
That's
There,
what
when,
that's the
there-
question.
when they, uh,
That's the question I'm also raising. The point is vacancies are known. COVID was not known. We spent hours and hours over COVID when we had no control over COVID. How about having a discussion on asking this question that you are asking as to why weren't these vacancies filled? I don't know. I remember when I was Secretary Government of India, I was after everybody that jobs have to be filled. And we did manage to do a few things. But the point is that the missionary zeal that is not getting reflected now should have been there earlier, because in any case there was this unemployment problem. So at least say 1 million jobs would have been filled by now. So the question is, we keep discussing intellectually, academically, and all these academic discussions are around what should be done. My discussion, I normally have a discussion on what ought to have been done has not been done. I'm not even asking for the moon. Let us travel on the ground and see what needs to be done. So the first job that needs to be done is identify what can be done, and it should be done, and stop talking about Make in India. See, the point is we live in an ethereal world, and we start talking everything is fine. You look at what targets we set up for Make in India, whether in
no,
terms of
no.
manufacturing sector,
Sorry, just
whether
to interrupt again. Having been in government for so many years and having an insider's view, what is the real reason for this reluctance to fill?
indifference.
Huh?
See, indifference. The question is, what
Indifference,
is your
political
priority?
level, official level.
No. See, in government, the drive comes from the top. What are the priorities that happens? How did Swachh Bharat Abhiyan happen? Government officers certainly do it, but the drive came from the top. The mission which the Prime Minister talks about, very rightly so, comes from a missionary. You can't expect civil servants to be missionaries. So if there is a drive for Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, yes, an officer can drive that. But if there's no drive from the top, we live in a democracy. Let's understand this very clearly. Civil servants are tools. The same tool can perform. They've demonstrated that they can perform when things are bad. The question is, where is the drive? So the question is that if the priorities are such, and that's why I keep saying, when you go into the why of an issue, you won't get publicity next day. Because why means going into the details of it, and it will take time. Now, who has the time? I want the headline tomorrow. So if you want headline every day, then things will not happen on the ground. Instead of work reflecting headlines, it is headlines followed by, you had this whole line of Make in India doing rounds all over the world. No one has evaluated what actually happened. And we use anecdotal evidence to demonstrate that it happened. Empirical evidence is to the contrary.
Absolutely. The manufacturing sector is in a really poor
No,
shape.
under Make in India, and the document is there, they had planned a manufacturing growth of 12 to 14%. What are the actual numbers? Actual numbers are 4.2% in 2017, 555 point. I'm sorry. The actual numbers are, I had those numbers, 2.8 in 2016, 4.4 in 2017, 4.6 in 2018, and 3.9 in 2019. This is well before COVID. So what are we talking about? We can't have this announcement being made every year. And I hope this announcement of the mission for employment gets implemented on the ground. It can be done. When the Prime Minister decides, he has demonstrated that if he wants, things can be done on the ground, have been done on the ground. And I keep saying Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, GST, and fintech, the technology in financial transactions. All this has happened in this country. Look at the way road sector is flourishing.
So why is it not? Why are jobs not a priority?
I don't know. You ask them. I don't know. I
Okay.
can't answer that question. Why is it not a priority? I don't know. Education, I knew because I handled that sector. I know. Because education impact happens 15 years down the line. Who's bothered about 15 years? Everyone is bothered about tomorrow. And hence, despite talking loud about education, the actual allocation to education in real terms, school education, actually came down. So, since I didn't handle as a sector, I can't say what is the reason behind it. Someone else may have to answer that question why.
Okay, earlier this year, we saw young people from Bihar and UP especially going on the rampage to protest against recruitment to railway jobs that were taking place. And right now, we are watching the opposition to the Agnipath scheme. What is this a sign of? I mean,
This
okay,
is
but
nothing.
people want jobs, yes. But what is
We
it?
are overplaying. We are overplaying this. I don't think this is happening for the first time. It's happened on a number of occasions in the country, and some of these states that you know are infamous for such stone pelting. And how does it help anybody? Stone pelting. It's a tragedy. I tweeted once. All those stone pelters and arsonists should understand that if their name gets recorded in any thana, in any case, they're not going to get any government jobs because police verification is required. What is this going on? I mean, I can understand their angst, I can understand the protest, but damaging public property and stone pelting, I mean, I had said earlier also, and I'd say it again, this is not going to help anything. I frankly speaking, since you mentioned that, I haven't gone into the details of this Agnipath or Agnivir,
Uh,
but my little understanding of the scheme is, I mean, it is better than doing nothing. I mean, you can always say there could be better options. If you left the government 2 years no recruitment, another 2 years no recruitment, I think it's much better off than that. Secondly, I mean, when government comes up with something, obviously there can be some problems with that. There are no perfect solutions to any problem in the world. So let's live with it for a while, see how it works, before jumping to the conclusion straight away and start burning trains and burning buses. It doesn't work. I'm not sure whether the response to this is an appropriate one. I don't know whether it's political or otherwise. I have no clue. But I don't think that really helps. Whereas fundamental issues relating to unemployment need to be addressed, but this is not the way to protest about it.
How to create an account on Khul Ke? Install the Khul Ke app from Play Store or App Store, or visit khulke.com. Enter a whole new world of conversations. Click on Create an account. Select your age. Enter your email ID or mobile number to receive a verification code. Enter the code and continue. Enter your name. Style your profile with the username of your choice. Create and confirm your password. Enter the invite code. Not invited? Don't worry, you can earn an invite by inviting just 5 friends to join Khul Ke. Select what interests you. Follow users with similar interests and create your flock. Enjoy Khul Ke for the love of conversations.
No, but if I could just ask one more question, a more pointed question on this. Some of the young men. Oh, it's gone off. It's gone
You're
off.
fine. I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
loud
So,
and clear.
some of the young men who were opposing this scheme, the Agnipath scheme, they said that they had actually already given the physical exam as well as the written exam, and they were waiting for the interview. And so now they wanted to understand whether they were now, would have to go through the whole process again. So
You know, I
they were upset about that. So why
no, I
didn't
agree. I agree
actually
with you.
complete, the examine or the interviews for those who have already gone through the first 2 stages?
No, I totally agree with you. The government should respond to that query and they should explain what will happen to those that have given the written exam and interview. But pelting stones and burning buses is not going to get them the answer. The issue that I'm raising is slightly different. I totally sympathize and empathize with those that are looking for job, those that have given written exam, those that have given interviews. I think someone in the government should listen to them and give them an answer. But does pelting stone or burning buses give them that answer? No, I mean that's my personal view. People may disagree.
Absolutely.
The extreme views these days in the country, if you don't agree with somebody, you are his enemy. So be it. I couldn't care less. If a wrong is a wrong is a wrong. So instead of I don't justify that, but I do understand that if they have a genuine issue, and since having been part of the government, I have been in such situations. When the CBSE paper leaked, all hell seemed to have broken loose. No. So as Secretary Government of India, I came to the fore and answered those questions. So someone should come to the fore and answer those questions, whatever be the consequences. So government should answer this as to those people who have given an exam, given an interview, whether they will be considered or not. If not, then why not? This dialogue should happen. Sometimes I understand that this dialogue doesn't happen. And that's where the problem is. If you look at the farmers' legislation also, I thought that was a wonderful legislation. Again, my personal view, people may disagree with it. But I think we didn't have a dialogue. We didn't have a conversation. We didn't take stakeholders into confidence as we should. Same is the problem with the Agniveer part. I wish stakeholders had been taken into confidence. I wish this program, and I will stand corrected if I'm wrong, I wish this scheme would have been put on the portal and public opinion sought before taking a final view on that. Why I'm saying that? Because we did precisely that. When we did coal block auctions, when we tried to sort the coal mess, we did it because we took every stakeholder into confidence. Doesn't mean that we all agreed, but they knew what was coming to them. So despite disagreement, they traveled along with us. So the fundamental issue is, as I say, that for an idea to fructify and sustain in a democracy like ours, it has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, judicially tenable, and emotionally relatable. This last dimension was added when this farm legislation happened. Emotional relatability means that you may have a brilliant idea which is politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, so on and so forth. But if the stakeholders do not accept it, then you may have trouble. So at least make an effort to get the stakeholders on board. My hunch is, and I hope I'm wrong, my hunch is that in this Veer scheme, Agniveer and Agnipath scheme, I don't think stakeholders were taken into confidence, as was the case in farm legislation. So despite the fact that there's nothing much wrong with what is in the scheme, people have started protesting.
There are many people who believe that this politics of polarization and hate during the current government's regime has damaged trust, which is one of the most important underlying drivers of economic development. Is that also affecting employment?
It may not be directly affecting employment, but it is indirectly certainly impacting employment. How? I have often said that center is a fiction, the real action is in the states. Unless we take states into confidence, action will not happen on the ground. And I said that as Coal Secretary because we interacted with the states. Now, if you are at war with the states, how will things happen on the ground? There could be political difference of opinion, major political difference of opinion. But if there is a war, there's no dialogue, everything is misinterpreted, then we have trouble. I will give you a sector which I am familiar with. Look at coal sector. Coal crisis keeps recurring. And one of the reasons for recurrence is shortage in coal production. And why is that shortage in coal production? Because coal exists in states that are ruled by non-NDA governments. Look at West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, Jharkhand, Maharashtra, and a little bit in Madhya Pradesh. Now, if you are at war with those states, how will you get land for coal mining? I'm just giving one example. There could be many more examples where center and state, despite political difference, should work as partners. So, as you rightly said, this distrust is not only otherwise, but also between center and the states. So, we should be working in tandem because if an industry has to be put up, there will be certain issues relating to central government, but most of the issues will relate to the state government. How about sitting across a table and becoming a principal facilitator? People asked me, even as education secretary and co-secretary, what were you? I said, I was principal facilitator. I couldn't do much. I was enabling things to happen. I think both the government, center and state should become facilitators to industry. Small scale, medium scale. I can go into the details of how it can be done because we did it. When I was heading project monitoring, what I was doing in cabinet secretariat, facilitating setting up of industry. And it happened. In 15 months time, there was clearance of more than 5 lakh crores worth of project during UPA 3, when all hell was UPA 2, when all hell was breaking loose. It can happen even now. I was very heartened. It was very heartening to learn that Ministry of Coal has set up that coal project monitoring portal again, that group to fast track projects. That's the way forward. Dialogue is the way forward. And as you said, if there's distrust between segments of society, if there's distrust between center and state, how will that dialogue happen? If that dialogue doesn't happen, manufacturing will not happen, services will not happen. If manufacturing and services don't happen, how will employment happen? So it may not directly impact employment, but I think it is impacting employment nonetheless. Certainly.
In the short term, do you think that India urgently needs cash transfers or an employment guarantee scheme for the bottom 20% to help them consume and pay back debt? Or you think that's a bad idea?
No, they already see MNREGA is doing that.
But apart from MNREGA,
there is cash transfer happening. All this financial arrangement is a temporary arrangement. We don't look at fundamentals. I mean, since I handled the power sector and coal sector, when we wanted to revive the discoms, we provided this financial assistance, so to say. Now, financial assistance can give you some time to sort out fundamental issues. But if fundamental issues are not sorted out, this problem will recur. So what is the fundamental issue? Generate employment. In the interim, yes, if there is a crisis, government does it. Government does cash transfer. It was done. MNREG is there. The ambit could be increased. But that's not a permanent solution. Permanent solution is getting the private sector and the public sector going to generate employment. Getting the manufacture. The ideals of Make in India needs to be worked out on the ground. I was going through the document of Make in India. It talks about what, but doesn't go into details of why. And that's why it didn't happen. There was a lot of roaring, but I don't think the line traveled any distance. Yes, anecdotally, yes. You talk to anybody who handled Make in India, he'll give examples of people who worked. No, look at the macro picture. And there hasn't been a third-party evaluation. Why don't we do third-party evaluation of, loud announcements that are made? Just to understand if things didn't go right, why didn't they go right? And we can correct it. I keep giving everyone the example of GST. GST is a classic example of taking everyone on board, not being involved. It was very tricky. It is only the sagacity of Arun Jaitley that GST happened. You imagine today if GST were to happen, it wouldn't have happened at all. It wouldn't happen because everyone is fighting with each other. So there could be difference of opinion between various stakeholders. But the beauty of democracy is you sit around a table, discuss and find solutions. Unfortunately, we are throwing stones at each other, literally and figuratively.
Now there are some questions from our listeners. So Saket wants to know, the Ministry of Labour scheme Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana has been to incentivize the creation of new employment along with social security benefits and restoration of loss of employment during the COVID pandemic. How effective was it?
I frankly speaking, post-retirement, I have not kept track of the scheme, so I'm not the right person to comment on that. I should know first the main features of the scheme and then understand its implementation. I'm sorry, I'm not conversant with the details of the scheme, so I won't be able to answer.
Then Joydeep has asked, how can the government attract more investments that also focus on employment generation?
I have been talking for quite some time about this issue on promoting investment. Why doesn't investment happen? I always believe in looking at the why of it in order to find the how of it. Investment will happen if the investor feels, first, comfortable, and second, he has some assurance of the return on investment. If those two things happen, then he will invest. And once investment happens, naturally employment will be generated. So instead of bothering directly about employment, let's try and facilitate implementation of projects through investment. And this can also be done. Again, having been in it for some time, I'm certain that it can be done. Again, how about engaging intensively with the investors and trying to understand why aren't they not investing? What does it take to make them invest? Instead of making announcements, normally what happens is a big mela is organized now. Everyone signs MOU, photographs taken, next day headline, and then no one talks about it there. No, it doesn't work that way. I have nothing against it. Photo opportunity should be there. Publicity should be there. But let's sit down with each one of them. And when I say each one of them, it's not merely big industrialists, 5,000 crore, 10,000. No. How about sitting with each smaller industry? Again, this can be done because it has been done. You create an institution, as we tried to do in Udyog Bandhu in UP, long back, 95, when we probably were the biggest attractors of investors after Maharashtra and Gujarat. Why did it happen? Because the investors started feeling comfortable.
Which years were that?
This was way back in 95, 94, 95. When investment, if you look at the investment, the IEMs during that time, you'll see UP ranks at number 3. And it happened. It happened here also. When we started doing that in the project monitoring group, it was perhaps for the first time that both the President CIA and President FICCI wrote to the Prime Minister stating that this is how industrialization should happen, referring to what was happening in the project monitoring group. I have those letters with me. So instead of becoming friendly with few, let's become friendly with everyone. Anyone who wants to do genuine investment, who's a genuine person, why not engage with them? Let them feel comfortable. Comfortable not in front of powers that be. Really comfortable, because no one will have the courage to say anything except one Bajaj here and a Bajaj there. No one will speak up because they know what's going to be the consequence if they say anything negative. In fact, they should be encouraged to come out with their problems with a view to finding a solution. There's no criticism. If there is a problem, so be it. Again, it would require a longer conversation. I'm presently trying to help someone who's trying to digitize all the processes in the government. Imagine a scenario which I imagine, I couldn't do when I was in service. I tried to do a few things. Imagine if an industrialist doesn't have to go to any government office to get any clearance. No physical. I started this way back in certain areas. It worked in certain areas. Now the effort is the common man should not go to any office for any work. He go to a private or a public kiosk, files his application, knows where his application is sitting, you track the application, and he gets his certificate or whatever he wants. Technology can do that. So I think we can become principal facilitators in the government. We should become facilitators. And this can only happen because the industrialist or the investor knows where the shoe pinches. Sit with him. Sit with him, not in a conference. In conference, no one will come out with ground reality. You sit with them in a smaller group, try and understand the problem. You can have your tamasha, you can have your photographs. But unless you go intensively into the causes of the problems that he faces, again, as I keep saying, I'm speaking from experience where it happened. And it pains me to see that something that had happened, why shouldn't it happen now?
Anil Swarup, in all the years that I've known you, you have been always been an optimist. But nevertheless, I will ask you this question. India was supposed to benefit from its demographic, from the demographic dividend. But with such a high rate of joblessness, are we going to lose out?
See, as you rightly said, I was an optimist. I am an optimist. I'll be an optimist. Because that's the only way to go forward. I still feel young in that sense that I see a bright future for this country. We have indeed committed a number of mistakes, but we have succeeded in a number of ways. And I'm sure that we are going to be benefited by this demographic dividend. I'm certain that it won't be a demographic disaster. The only contention that I have now is, let us accept where things are going wrong. Because if we don't do that, everything is not going wrong. There are a lot many things that are happening which are very good. But if we don't accept the fact of a few things going wrong, we'll never correct them. We'll keep them, pushing them under the carpet, or the lion will keep roaring without traveling any distance.
Thank you so much, Anil. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.